welcome back. Or if this is your first time here, welcome. Glad you found this place. Let me ask you something. Have you ever been completely alone somewhere and had the absolute certainty that you were not? No sound, nothing moved, nothing crossed the wall. Just that feeling cold, specific, very private, that something else was sharing the space with you. And you did not look, because some part of you already knew that looking would make it real. Tonight's stories live in that feeling. They come from ordinary places. A rental cabin up north, a highway at night, a hospital ward at the far end of a corridor that nobody used, and in every one of them, the wrongness is quiet. It doesn't announce itself, it waits in a small detail. A door that should have been empty, still making sounds. A road that kept bringing you back to the same mile marker. A room the record said was vacant. If you're back again, thank you. You know what this is. If you're new, subscribe. This is somewhere worth returning to. Turn the lights down. Put your earbuds in. Let the room go quiet. Let's begin. The Caretaker at Dunmore Road. My uncle owned a piece of land in northern New Hampshire. About 40 acres of pine and birch, and old mud, with a small cabin at the end of a gravel road that stopped being maintained sometime in the late 90s. The cabin was nothing impressive. 2 rooms, a wood stove, a sleeping loft with a mattress that smelled like mothballs and long winters. He used it for deer season, mostly, and sometimes in summer for a week or 2 of fishing. Then his knees got bad, and then his wife got sick, and the cabin sat empty for close to 6 years. When he asked me to go up and check on the place, make sure the pipes hadn't burst, clear the gutters, see if the roof had held, I said yes without thinking too hard about it. I was between jobs. It was late September. A week alone in the woods sounded like exactly what I needed. The drive up took about 4 hours. I got there just before dark, windows down, pine smells so thick it was almost a wait. I spent the first hour getting the generator going and working through the water lines. The pipes were fine. The roof had a soft spot over the back corner, but nothing urgent. I split some wood from the pile out back, got the stove going, and ate dinner out of a can while the wind moved through the trees outside. It was peaceful. I want to be clear about that. The first 2 nights were peaceful. I slept well. I walked the property in the mornings. I read in the afternoons. The nearest neighbor was a man named Reg, who ran a small sugaring operation about a mile down the road. I had met him once years ago when I came up with my uncle. He waved when I drove past. That was the full extent of my human contact up there. The 3rd night was when it started. I had gone to bed around 10. The loft was warm from the stove and I fell asleep fast. I don't know what woke me. No particular sound, no obvious reason. I just came awake suddenly, the way you do when something has shifted without you being able to name what. The cabin was dark. The stove had burned down to coals. I lay still and listened. The sound I heard was the back door, not opening, not closing, just the soft, specific sound of a hand pressing against it from outside. That slight flex and settle of old wood under slow, steady pressure, like someone leaning their weight against the door, testing it. Patient. Not urgent. I lay there for a full minute, maybe more. Then silence. Then the sound again. Same pressure, same deliberate rhythm. I got up. I want to be honest, I was scared, but I was already telling myself it was an animal. Black bear, maybe. Curious about food smell. I grabbed the flashlight from the shelf beside the mattress and climbed down the loft ladder. The back door was bolted. I had not left it unbolted. I stood beside it in the dark and listened for another few minutes, and heard nothing else. I checked the front door, also bolted. I shone the flashlight through the small window next to the back door, and saw only the edge of the woodpile and the dark tree line 20 feet beyond it. I went back to bed. I told myself bear. I almost believed it. The next morning, I walked the full perimeter. I don't know what I was looking for. Tracks, maybe, or marks on the doorframe. There were no marks on the doorframe. The mud around the back stoop was soft from rain 2 days prior, and there were no prints in it. Not a deer track, not a boot, not a paw. Whatever had pressed against that door had not come from the mud. It had not come from the ground. I stood at the stoop for a while and looked at the mud, and then I went inside and made coffee, and did not think about it out loud. That evening, just before dark, I was splitting wood by the pile when the feeling came on. It arrives the way those feelings do, gradually, then all at once until it is impossible to ignore. I stopped splitting and looked at the tree line. The pines stood quiet. The light was that draining gray September dusk that makes everything look farther away than it is. I didn't see anything in the trees, but I noticed something at the corner of the cabin. At the south-facing wall where it met the back, there was a shape, a density of shadow that was slightly wrong, slightly more present than it should have been at that angle of light. The shape was roughly the proportion of a person standing very still with their back against the wall, not moving, not producing sound. I said loudly, "Who's there?" Nothing answered. I walked toward it. The shape did not move. As I got closer, 10 feet, then 5, it resolved into nothing more than the shadow of the eave overhanging the corner. The right angle of light, the way the overhang projected, an ordinary shadow. I stood there with my heart going too fast and felt ridiculous. That night, I left the lamp on. The sound came again around 2 a.m. Same door, same patient rhythm. This time I moved faster. I crossed the cabin in the dark and unbolted the door and pulled it open in one motion. The stoop was empty, but the air was wrong. That is the only word I have for it. The night was cold, which was expected for late September, but the air at that open doorway was colder than the air 3 feet to the left or right of it. Localized, a specific pocket of cold, as if something had just been standing directly there and had not quite finished leaving. And there was a smell. Not strong, not anything I could name cleanly, like still water, like the inside of an old well, like something that had been closed for a long time and was only now letting out air. I stood in that doorway for longer than I should have. Then I closed it and bolted it and did not open it again. In the morning I called my uncle. I didn't tell him about the door or the shape or the cold. I told him the roof needed patching sooner than later, that I had done what I could for the gutters, and that I thought it was time to head back. He thanked me. I packed my bag. On my way down the road, I stopped at Reg's place to let him know I was leaving, and to give him my uncle's number in case anything came up with the property. Rig was a quiet man, not unfriendly, and he poured me coffee without asking. We stood at his kitchen counter, and I almost didn't say anything. And then I did. I asked him whether anyone else used the land during the off-season. Trespassers maybe, or someone who had been squatting in the cabin when it was empty. Whether there had been any trouble up that way. Reg was quiet for a moment. He set down his mug. Then he said that years ago, before my uncle bought the property, there had been a caretaker for the full stretch of road up there. A man who had looked after the land for some previous owner for a long time. Reg said he didn't know the full story, only that when the land changed hands, the caretaker had stayed on. Not officially, not welcome, just present. He would be seen near the cabin sometimes at night, at the edge of the property, standing close to the tree line or near the back of the structure. He'd show up at the margins of things. Eventually, Reg said he stopped being seen altogether. I asked when that was. Reg thought about it. Said it was probably around 1996, maybe 1997. He would have been in his 60s by then, Reg thought. Maybe older? I nodded. I drank my coffee. I did not ask anything else. I drove home in 4 hours without stopping. I have been back to the property once since in daylight, with my uncle to help him patch the roof. We left before dark. I did not sleep there. I do not plan to, not because I can tell you what pressed against that back door or what stood at the corner of the cabin in the draining September light or what caused that localized cold and that smell at the open threshold. I cannot tell you any of those things with certainty, but I keep coming back to what Reg said. He stopped being seen. He said it plainly, the way you say a fact. And I keep turning it over because stopping being seen and stopping existing are two very different things. One of them is gone. The other one is just somewhere you can't look directly at. And the mud around that stoop was soft, and there was nothing in it. And whatever was pressing against that door had come from somewhere else entirely. He called from downstairs. I'll keep this one short because the person who told it to me, a woman named Jess, told it short. She doesn't dress it up. That's actually what makes it worse. She was house sitting at her parents' place while they were traveling. Ground floor in a row house in Yorkshire. Nice quiet street, nothing she hadn't done a dozen times before. She was upstairs in her old room reading, lamp on, around 9:30 at night. She heard her brother's voice from the ground floor. She has one brother. His name is Callum. He lives about 90 minutes away, hadn't mentioned coming over. The voice said, "Jess, come down." She recognized it immediately. She called back, "Cal? I didn't know you were coming." No answer. She waited. Called again. The voice said from directly beneath her room, "Come down." She said later she could not tell you why she stopped moving. The words were right. The voice was right. The pacing was right. But something, some detail she never fully identified, was asking her not to get up. She called Callum's number. He answered on the second ring. He was at home 90 minutes away. He had not left the house. He had not called anyone. He was watching television. She sat on the edge of the bed with her back against the wall and her phone in her hand, and she did not go downstairs. She sat there until her parents got home at midnight and came in through the front door, and she heard her mother's voice, which was the right voice in the right direction, and only then did she come down. Nothing was in the house, nothing was moved or taken. All the doors and windows were locked from the inside exactly as she had left them. Callum has a theory. He always has one. Something about the brain stitching familiar sounds into a voice it wants to hear. Stress responses, pattern recognition. Jess doesn't argue with him. She just doesn't house sit alone anymore. She doesn't explain why to people who weren't there, and when someone calls her name from another room, she waits one beat longer than she used to before she answers. The mile markers. I'm going to describe this accurately, and I'll ask you to hold your theories until I'm finished, because I spent a long time trying to apply them myself and none of them held. I was driving solo from Sudbury to Sault Ste. Marie on the Trans-Canada, a stretch of highway in northern Ontario. That is, if you've never done it, approximately 2.5 hours of rock cut and black spruce and the occasional truck stop. I had done it before. I knew the road. I had left Sudbury around 3 p.m. in October. Clear sky, good conditions, intending to arrive by early evening. The fog came in fast, which fog doesn't usually do on that highway. I've driven it in all kinds of weather, and fog on that stretch tends to be patchy, low to the ground, thin. This was different. It moved in like a curtain drawing. 1 minute I had clear sight lines. 10 minutes later I was doing 60 in what I can only describe as a white wall, visibility down to maybe 25 feet of road ahead. I slowed to 50. I turned on my hazards. I kept my eyes on the center line. The shoulders on that stretch are narrow, and the drop to the ditch is fast, so I didn't feel safe pulling over. I kept driving. I told myself it would break soon. I had been going for maybe 20 minutes in that fog when I noticed the mile markers. I need to tell you how I know this, because I'm aware how it sounds. I had been watching the road closely, more closely than usual, because of the visibility. and my brain had latched onto the markers the way it latches onto anything regular when you're stressed and understimulated. I wasn't tracking them intentionally. I just noticed them the way you notice streetlights passing, and they had been going up. 226, 227, 228, 229, 230. Then I passed 228. I told myself I had miscounted. I had been tired. I had been staring at fog for 20 minutes. Maybe I'd zoned out and missed the turnover. I watched more carefully. 229, 230, 228. I did not turn around. I could not have turned around. The road did not allow it, and I would have felt the motion and seen the headlights sweep. I was going in one direction, one lane, one continuous road, and the numbers kept looping. I drove 228 to 230 at least 4 times, maybe 5. I stopped counting after 4 because counting was making it harder to breathe evenly, and then the fog broke, completely, all at once, like a switch. One moment white wall, next moment flat gray October highway, as far ahead as I could see, and a transport truck sitting on the shoulder about 300 feet ahead of me with its hazards going. I pulled over behind it. The driver was out of his cab, coffee in one hand, cigarette in the other, and he looked at me with mild surprise when I got out. I asked him if he had come through the fog back there. He said, "What fog?" He said he had been pulled over for about 40 minutes eating his lunch and watching his time. He said the road behind me had been clear all afternoon. I looked back the way I'd come. The highway was straight and open in both directions. No fog, no overcast mass, nothing. I did not know what to say to that. I got back in my car and drove to Sault Ste. Marie. I arrived just after dark. The drive should have taken about 2.5 hours from Sudbury. My phone said I had been in the car for 4 hours and 15 minutes. I had no explanation for the extra time. There were no stops on my location history during that stretch. No missed calls, no service gaps. Just 4 hours and 15 minutes on a road that should have taken 2.5. I have driven that highway twice since. Both times nothing unusual, full visibility, no markers repeated. Arrived on time. I have told this story to 4 or 5 people. 2 of them had theories about fog and spatial disorientation and fatigue. The other 2 didn't say anything useful. I don't think I was disoriented. I think the markers repeated. I think I drove something close to the same half-mile of road, in one direction, multiple times, without being able to feel it happening. And I think whatever that was, whatever stretched or folded or repeated that stretch of road, it gave me back my car and my body and my route on the other side, and kept the rest for itself. I've never been able to account for those 2 hours. I have stopped trying, but I watch the markers now. Every drive, every highway, I watch them. The night technician. I worked the overnight shift at a large printing facility outside Osaka for approximately 18 months. This was several years ago, prior to my relocation. The building was modern, partially automated, and between the hours of midnight and 6 a.m., there were ordinarily only 3 staff on site: myself, a floor supervisor named Hayashi-san, and the quality station operator assigned to the East Wing. I will describe the East Wing because it is relevant. The East Wing was a long corridor connecting the main production floor to a secondary machine hall. It was fully lit, fluorescent, ceiling-mounted, and the fixtures along that particular stretch flickered intermittently in a pattern that maintenance had reviewed twice and attributed to aging wiring. The pattern was 2 short, 1 longer. It repeated. There was nothing structurally wrong, we were told. It was simply an irregularity. I note this only because it produced an effect over time. The corridor felt occupied, is the clearest way I can put it, not by anything specific, simply by its own rhythm. The incident occurred on a Wednesday, approximately 4 months into my employment. I was completing a calibration check on the east wing machines, a routine task approximately 30 minutes, when I observed a figure at the far end of the corridor. A man, standing still, facing away from me. This was irregular. Hayashi-san conducted no east wing rounds at that hour. The quality station operator remained at her station. There was no security staff overnight. I was not aware of any scheduled maintenance. I called out a greeting. The figure did not respond. I walked toward it. At approximately 30 feet, I could see clearly a man in his late 50s, wearing the standard gray facility uniform. Medium build, dark hair going silver at the temples. Standing with his back to me, head slightly bowed, facing the door to the storage annex at the end of the corridor. I greeted him again. Nothing. At 15 feet, I stopped. I'm not certain I can justify stopping at 15 feet rather than continuing. I had no specific reason to stop. There was nothing visually wrong with the man in any way I could identify at that moment. But I stopped and I did not move closer, and I said in Japanese, "Are you all right? Is something wrong with the annex?" He turned around. The face was ordinary, a man in his late 50s, which was consistent with what I had observed from behind. He looked at me with a neutral expression. Then he said in a flat voice, "The door to the annex should not be open." I looked at the annex door. It was closed. The status light above it was green, locked, as it was required to be during overnight hours. I said, "The door is not open. It is locked." He looked at the door. Then he looked at me. Then he walked past me down the corridor in the direction of the main floor. I turned and watched him go. He rounded the corner at the far end. That was all. I returned to the main floor within the next few minutes. I located Hayashi-san at his monitoring station and described the man's age, build, hair, uniform, and asked whether additional maintenance staff had been dispatched that night without my being informed. Hayashi-san said no. He said the facility's overnight roster had been the same for over a year, and no one fitting that description was on it. I told him I had just spoken to the man in the East Wing corridor. Hayashi-san looked at me for a moment, then walked to the CCTV terminal and pulled the East Wing corridor feed for the previous 20 minutes. The footage was running. The timestamp was correct. The corridor showed normal fluorescent light, the fixtures doing their irregular 2 short 1 long cycle. I was visible entering the corridor. I was visible stopping in the middle of the corridor. I was visible standing still for approximately 3 minutes. I was visible walking out. Nothing else was in the corridor. I do not know what to make of the CCTV footage. I am not given to explaining things through phenomena I cannot verify. I looked at that footage several times over the following days, and each time the corridor was empty except for me. What I do know is what the man said, not "the door is open." He said the door should not be open. The grammar is a prediction, a correction of a future state or a state that had not yet arrived when I was standing there. I worked at the facility for another 14 months after this incident. The East Wing corridor lights continued their pattern until a full electrical refitting the following year. I never saw the man again. I completed my shift that night and every night after. I did not tell anyone else what I had seen in the corridor. There did not seem to be a useful reason to. "11 weeks. This comes from a reader. She asked me not to use her name, so I won't. I have kept her details exactly as she sent them. She moved into a ground floor apartment in Brisbane in early March. 1 bedroom, small courtyard, good natural light through the kitchen window. She had checked the building thoroughly before signing the lease. Standard block, 4 floors, mixed tenants, quiet neighborhood. She felt settled almost immediately, which she noted because she usually didn't. The tenant above her was a man she saw occasionally in the stairwell. 50s, she guessed. Polite nod. Brief smile. She never learned his name. In 11 weeks of living below him, their interaction had consisted entirely of passing in the hallway. Then he knocked on her door. When she opened it, he gave her the same polite, brief smile she recognized from the stairwell and said he was sorry to bother her. He had noticed a water stain appearing on his bathroom floor and wondered if she had any plumbing issues she was aware of. She told him no, nothing she had noticed. He thanked her. She closed the door. She thought nothing of it. That afternoon, her property manager called about scheduled maintenance for the building. She mentioned the water concern in passing, gave the unit number above her own. The property manager went quiet. Then he said, "Which unit did she say?" She gave the number again. He said that unit had been vacant since June. She had moved in during the first week of March. She asked for clarification. He confirmed. The unit above hers had been empty for 9 months. No tenant, no authorized access, no scheduled maintenance. There had been no one living upstairs since the previous June. She described the man to the property manager. He did not respond in a way that helped. She moved out 3 weeks later. The manager did not contest the early exit. She said later that the thing that stayed with her was not the man himself, or the vacant unit, or even the fact of 11 weeks of polite stairwell encounters with someone who should not have been there. It was that he came to her door about a water stain, that he had a concern, that he was, by all appearances, managing the ordinary inconveniences of living in a building he did not exist in. Ward 7. I have worked as a medical translator for a private services firm for a number of years now. My languages are Romanian and German. There is a small but consistent demand for someone who can move between clinical environments and foreign-speaking patients, attending consultations, handling paperwork, sitting in the room so that nothing critical is lost between one language and another. The work is professional, largely procedural, and not something I have ever found unpleasant. I'm good at it. I am good at keeping a steady frame of reference in environments that are, by nature, charged with anxiety. I'm telling you this because what happened at the clinic in Brasov is not consistent with my general relationship to the world. I have thought about it a great deal over the past 3 years, and I have not arrived at a satisfactory explanation. I do not offer this account as evidence of anything. I offer it as a record of what I observed, noted, and continue to think about at odd hours. The assignment brought me to a private rehabilitation clinic, housed in a building at the edge of the city, a large pre-war structure that had served various institutional purposes under the communist government and had been extensively renovated in the years following. The exterior retained its original mass, stone iron window frames, a heaviness that the updated signage and clean gravel drive could not fully counter. Inside, it was modern, good lighting, clean surfaces, competent professional staff who moved through the building with the particular efficiency of people who had learned to work around the history of a place without acknowledging it. I was there for 6 days to support a German-speaking patient named Werner, a retired civil engineer from Stuttgart in his mid-70s, recovering from a mild stroke and making good progress. He was methodical, patient, and had strong opinions about the temperature of his soup. My role was to translate for nursing staff during rounds, attend his consultations with the clinic's neurologist, and handle any administrative paperwork that required his signature. Straightforward work. I had done it many times. The clinic occupied 3 patient floors plus a ground level of administrative and therapeutic space. Each patient floor had 7 wards, standard 4-bed rooms running along 2 corridors, east and west. Werner was in Ward 3 on the 2nd floor, in the western corridor. I had no professional reason to visit the eastern corridor on any floor. On my 3rd day at the clinic, a duty nurse asked me to deliver a file to a colleague whose station was near the far end of the 3rd floor eastern corridor. This was a minor errand, a matter of walking down a hallway and handing over a folder. I took the stairs. The third-floor eastern corridor was quiet in the way that medical facilities are quiet in the early afternoon. The particular stillness of rooms where people are either sleeping or trying to... I passed Ward 4, Ward 5, Ward 6. The doors to each were partially open, the rooms visible in the narrow gap as I walked by. Beds, equipment, the standard geography of a rehab ward. I reached Ward 7. The door was half open. I did not need to enter, but I glanced through the gap as I passed, an automatic thing the way the eye moves toward openings. There were 4 beds. 3 were empty, sheets flat and tight. In the 4th bed, closest to the window, a patient lay still beneath the pulled-up blanket, head on the pillow, face turned slightly away. Ordinary, except for the hour. What was not ordinary was what I saw in the air above the 4th bed, at a height I would estimate at approximately 4 to 5 feet above the mattress. Something was crouched. I use the word crouched because I lack a better one. It was not standing, not floating. It occupied space the way something crouches on a surface, except the surface below it was air. It was approximately human in its overall proportion. Limbs, a head, a torso. But the proportions were wrong in a way I found difficult to process in the moment. The limbs too long and folded at joints that did not map to joints. I know. The mass that I interpreted as a head was oriented downward, toward the patient. It was not moving. It was not making any sound I could hear through the gap in the door. It had the quality of something that had been there for some time. Not something that had just arrived. Something settled in the way a person settles when they have been sitting quietly in one place long enough to become part of the room. I stood outside that door, I do not know for how long. It may have been 4 seconds. It may have been 10. Then I walked to the duty nurse's station, delivered the file, and walked back down the eastern corridor without looking at the door to Ward 7. That evening, I found an opportunity to ask the floor coordinator, in a tone I worked to keep neutral, whether Ward 7 had current occupants. She checked her board. She told me Ward 7 was empty, had been since the previous Monday. A patient had been discharged, no new admission pending for that bed or any of the others. I said that was interesting, as I had seen someone in a bed there earlier in the afternoon. She looked up at me. She asked what time. I told her approximately 2:15 p.m. She wrote something on the corner of a piece of paper and thanked me, and moved on in the smooth, professional manner of someone closing a door on a subject. I did not follow up. It did not seem useful to follow up. I made a decision that evening not to use the 3rd floor eastern corridor again for the remainder of my time at the clinic, and I kept to it. I took the western stairs. I routed my errands the long way around. Werner was in the western corridor, and my professional duties kept me there. I had no difficulty avoiding the east wing for the remaining 3 days. On my last morning at the clinic, Werner and I sat in his room going over his discharge summary together. He was in good spirits, looking forward to going home, talking about his daughter's plans to renovate her kitchen in a way he clearly intended to supervise. We worked through the paperwork methodically. When we were nearly finished, he paused and looked at the window for a moment. Then, in the careful, understated German of a man choosing not to make a fuss, he mentioned that he had not slept well during his first 2 nights at the clinic. I asked why. He said there had been something in the building at night. A pressure, he called it, the closest word he could find. A sense of something moving through the corridors that was not ordinary movement. He said on one occasion he believed it had been in his room. He had lain very still with his eyes closed until the feeling passed. I asked him when he had stopped noticing it. He thought about this, he said, around the 3rd day. He thought he had slept normally since. I considered that. My 3rd day was when I had walked the eastern corridor, when I had looked through the gap in the door to Ward 7, when something had been crouched, patient and still, above an empty bed. I asked Werner what the feeling had been like, specifically. He took a moment with this. wanting to be precise. Then he said in German, "Wie wenn etwas sucht," like when something searches. I thanked him, shook his hand, and wished him a good recovery. He gave me a small wave from his chair as I left. I have been sent back to that clinic twice since on other assignments. I request placement in the Western Wing. I conduct all my business in the Western Corridor and on the ground floor. The clinic continues to operate well. Their recovery outcomes are consistently good. The staff are professional. The building is clean. I do not go near Ward 7. I have not told this to anyone at my firm. I do not think it would be received in a way that was useful to either party. I have thought about it alone, and I have not arrived anywhere satisfying. What I return to most often, late at night, is Werner's timeline. He stopped noticing the presence on the third day. He said the same day I walked down the Eastern Corridor, the same afternoon something in Ward 7 turned its attention from an occupied bed to a translator standing in a half-open doorway. I do not know what I saw. I do not know what was searching. I do not know what it found when it looked up. I know I walked away. I know Ward 7 was empty. I know I have not walked down that corridor since, and I know that I will not. That is the complete account. The window at 3 a.m. I worked at an all-night copy shop in the Palermo neighborhood of Buenos Aires for about 7 months, maybe 2 years ago. It was not glamorous. I was 19. The shift was 10 p.m. to 6 a.m., and mostly it was students, drunk people printing things, the occasional office worker who had messed up a deadline, the kind of place where you knew all the regulars by their orders before you knew their names. There was a woman who stood outside. Not every night, maybe 3 or 4 nights a week, always between 2 a.m. and 3:30 a.m., give or take. She stood across the narrow street, right under the lip of the building opposite, and she faced our window. The first time I noticed her, I thought she was waiting for someone. The second time I thought maybe she was waiting for the shop. People did that sometimes, waited outside if they were embarrassed to come in. The third time I went to the door and called over, asked if she needed help. She did not react at all. Not a turn of the head, not a shift in weight, nothing. She was maybe 40 feet away and I was speaking clearly, and she stood exactly as she had been standing and did not respond in any way. I went back inside. I told my colleague Tomas about it. He looked through the window. He said he didn't see anyone. I looked. She was still there, still facing us. I pointed her out. He looked directly at the spot I was pointing at and said, quite matter-of-factly, that there was no one there. He wasn't joking. He looked genuinely confused by what I was pointing to. That was the part I could not make sense of. Not the woman I could see clearly. The part that stayed with me was that Tomas was looking at exactly the same spot and seeing nothing. I watched her until about 3:15 when she was simply gone. No movement, no turn, just gone between one moment and the next, the way a thought goes. I mentioned it to Tomas again at the end of the shift. He said I was probably overtired and that night shifts did that to you. He said it with a shrug. He was not unsympathetic. Maybe he was right. I was 19 and I was on 7-month shift work, and maybe that does something to what you see at 3 a.m. But here's the thing I have not been able to let go of. The shop had a camera above the door facing out toward the street. I checked the footage from that shift before I left. The street was empty the whole night. No one stood under that building. The spot was clear the entire time I was watching it. But in the footage between 2:20 and 3:14, the light from our window cast a shadow onto the pavement of the building opposite. The shadow was the shape of a person, standing still, facing us. There was nothing casting it. Alright, that's where we leave it tonight. A lot of empty rooms in this one. A lot of records that said one thing while something else was already there. I hope you're alright. I hope your corridor is quiet and your door is where you left it. Get some sleep. If any detail in tonight's stories landed somewhere close to home, leave it in the comments. I do read them. Everyone, take care of yourself. I'll see you in the next one.